What's going on, everybody? It is Anthony from #BeTheChange. Truth will set you free. We've got an interesting discussion today. We've got about 45 minutes to have it, and I've got some great guests, both of whom you probably know. I know most of you, if not all of you, especially since we're on Kash's page, know Cashley Kelly. Our other guest is Chad O. Jackson from the Uncle Tom films, and we are going to have an actual real debate instead of just and by debate, I mean conversation, instead of just a celebration of Martin Luther King Day and the Civil Rights Movement. We're going to talk as much truth as we possibly can have. I'm going to have these two gentlemen come on and have a discussion, a conversation, and if I could guide that conversation, even better. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get the show started. I'm going to do a little countdown to kick the tires and light the fires. Then we're going to talk Martin Luther King Day. So if you could, please like this video, share this video. I know some of you are at work. But do all the things to the video so people might want to watch it later. Let's get started. What's going on? It's always good to see the fact that we have a following again, thanks to Kash. You know, he somehow, Chocolate Thunder knows how to break the algorithm. That's how he rolls. So we are back with a decent amount of viewers. So thank you guys for joining. Please, again, like this video, share the video, and then we'll get right into it. First off, Chad, could you introduce yourself to everybody real quick?
Yeah, so I'm Chad O. Jackson, and I am based here in Dallas. I'm an entrepreneur. I am an independent researcher and co-producer for the film Uncle Tom 2 and some other forthcoming films.
And when does Uncle Tom 3 come out?
We have no idea. Right now, we're working on a film that has nothing to do with black stuff, has nothing to do with, well, I guess in a roundabout way it does, because some of your run-of-the-mill black activists like, Martin Luther King, Angela Davis, W.E.B. Du Bois and others make an appearance in the film. But that film is called Comrade Yuri. It's about the late Yuri Bezmenov, who defected from the KGB and tried to inform Americans as to how their whole world is a facade that is the construction of sinister players, social engineers, so to speak, and how there's a veil over most of our eyes, and he was largely ignored in 1984. So we're making a film about that, and we're going to pick back up on Uncle Tom 3 thereafter. So I have no idea when that's going to be out.
Excellent. And real quick, so we're going to have a little bit of a juxtaposition in the views of Martin Luther King. But before we get into that, I'm going to kind of have you guys state your positions. But last thing, Chad, you owned a plumbing business. You were a successful entrepreneur. How did you get so deep into the research behind some of these cultural issues and misguidings when it came to history?
Well, I guess just like anybody who sets on this path, it's not so much that, I've always been a questioning type. If something doesn't seem right or if something doesn't quite add up, I'm always going to ask questions. And to be frank with you, when it comes to the whole Martin Luther King thing and the civil rights thing being a ruse, this for me did actually start with the recording of Yuri Bezmenov, the one that he did with G. Edward Griffin, who's still with us. But in this recording, in this 1984 interview, Yuri Bezmenov talks about ideological subversion and how basically the Soviet Union and its agents set out to destroy or implode America from the inside, because America was so unpenetrable that it was very difficult to Sovietize it in the same way that you're able to do many African countries or Southeast Asian countries and so on and so forth. America was unpenetrable because its people knew what freedom tasted like, for one, and two, we were ethically speaking, we were a quote unquote Christian country, although I would argue that we weren't really a Christian country. We're more of a secular country, but we were Christian enough to know that we don't want communism. And so it became very tough to penetrate And so what the Soviet Union did, where they developed ways and strategies to so influence culture in the United States so that it can implode from the inside, not only influence culture, but also install agents within the government who are also operating on behalf of the Bolsheviks. And so Martin Luther King is very much a part of that. He's not separate or distinguished from this whole ploy to ideologically subvert America by way of the Black church. Martin Luther King himself rejected the deity of Christ. He says so in his own papers that from the age of 12, he rejected that Jesus even resurrected from the dead. His brand of theology was actually liberation theology, or the so-called social gospel, which isn't really the gospel at all. The social gospel says that it's on America or the system to change, whereas Christianity, in its essence, says that it's on you to turn your heart over on an individual basis to Christ. So those are two completely different ideas of what Christianity is. Martin Luther King basically used the respectability of a Christian pastor to install something else and something different into the so-called Black church. And he was successfully able to do it, him along with his contingent, to the extent to where now a lot of your Black churches don't really preach the gospel; they preach the social gospel,
right?
And they don't really address the sin of individual sin, and this is why a lot of these churches are stuck, unfortunately. And I know I'm kind of all over the place because we're kind of strapped for time, but
no, that was a good starting point, because you kind of introduce how you get into it, and then you're laying the foundation for your belief system on Martin Luther King. So Kash, you and I talked a little bit before this call, kind of our belief systems, and the fact, I mean, leading up to probably before I met Chad and had this long conversation, how I felt about Martin Luther King. So you're incredibly well educated, well read, Kash. You have over and over, and the people asking questions, is Kash out? Kash, he is free. He's in a half.
I'm live.
He's out. But give your belief system as an educated viewpoint. But what is your belief system on Martin Luther King?
Well, personally, I believe obviously Martin Luther King was dealing with some liberal-minded people and some socialists, I could say, but his position is what was most important for me. It wasn't whatever his religious beliefs was as a pastor. That's beyond the point for me, because when I learned about Dr. King, it instilled some things in me, some morals that I didn't have before, and taught me things about myself that I didn't know. And he was the first person that made me think, because I grew up pretty violent. It made me think that I don't have to use violence all the time. See, I'm not nonviolence by any means. You know what I'm saying? I'm like what they called me before I got locked up, Malcolm Mix. I'm a mixture of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. So I'm for nonviolence as long as you don't threaten me and my family. You know what I'm saying? Then I'm for violence. And right. So that's my stance on it. But Martin Luther King to me is somebody that did an amazing work in the world, regardless of if who was backing him or who was helping him or who had a ulterior motive. I think that his motives were pure. And I think maybe he just didn't know who he was involved with, because he stood on what he believed. The man got busted in the head with a brick and still told people, look, we're not here for that. We're not going to fight. He really practiced what he preached. So that's my position on him.
So, go ahead, Chad. I mean, because one thing I want to specify is, like, I don't know if there's anybody on the civil rights movement, on the anti-civil rights movement, that is as well read as Chad O. Jackson. So if he's bringing up points, this is just stuff that we get to listen to and probably do more of our own research, of course. So it's not like we're like, no, you're wrong, or you're this, that, and the other. It's more of a, let's bring some different viewpoints to life, because we have been indoctrinated as children to make sure that we only believe one narrative about all of this stuff. So Chad, what would be your response be to, go ahead, Kash, what were you going to say before I go back to Chad?
I was going to say, for everybody that's watching, Chad O. Jackson is an amazing brother, and I could tell already by his presentation. So if anything is said by he or I that is taking offense to anybody, please don't take offense, because this is just a meaningful discussion trying to educate. And I'm trying to be educated as well, because I'm sure he's going to present some things that I've never heard before that I'm going to have to look into. So with that, Chad, you got the floor, my brother.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that. But everything that you mentioned as far as like him having the dog sicked on him and all the things and still preaching nonviolence, that's all part of the ruse. Because what people need to understand is that when it comes to communist agitation or communist strategies and tactic, that's all part of it. Nonviolence is part of it. Nonviolence didn't originate with Martin Luther King. It actually originated in the Soviet Union as part of their agitprop program. Agitprop, for those who don't know, stands for agitation and propaganda. Part and parcel of the agitprop program is creating martyrs. The way that you create martyr is one of two ways. Either, can you hear me?
I can. I think you might. Did you get a text message, Cash? Yeah, go ahead and pop right back in. You're good. You're good. You're good, Chad. Keep going.
I'd rather wait for him to come back so he can know.
No, absolutely. So yeah, while you're finishing, or when you're going to go back to that, while we wait for Cash, just when we're looking at this whole conversation as a whole, you've got Chad and Cash talking about it. Picture being a white dude saying, "I don't know how I feel about Martin Luther King." that adds a whole nother dynamic when it comes to this conversation. Chad spoke at the Great American Summit when we were out in Dallas, and just he has such a well-versed viewpoint on so many different areas that it's fascinating that we can even have these kind of conversations about stuff that is so ingrained in us. I think Chad and I even talked about, did we talk about Helen Keller?
Briefly.
I think we did on my Blunt Force discussion show, just about the fact that all of these paradigms that we have, all these paradigms are really rooted in this place of indoctrination as children, essentially, and they've carried it all the way to this point. So
yeah.
All right. You good? Can you hear us, Cash?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So I think somebody probably tried to call you, and that's what happened, right?
I don't know. It clicked off.
You're good.
Can you hear me, Cash?
Yes, sir. I can hear you.
Okay. What was the last thing you heard me say?
You didn't even say anything. It clicked out.
Oh wow.
Okay. It was right when it switched over to you. Then. Okay.
Well, so just to reiterate the best way that I can, so everything that you laid out as far as the fact that Martin Luther King, he went to jail and he had the dog sicked on him and the hoses, and this demonstrates how, he was true to the cause. My response to that is that's very much a part of Soviet or Bolshevik or communist tactics. It's part of the strategy. It's based in what's called agitprop, which stands for agitation and propaganda. And the whole point of it is, one of the key components of it is to create martyrs. And the way that you create a martyr is one of two ways. Either you put that person in a position where they're taken to jail publicly and you release the mugshot. This does something in the psyche of the masses to where they believe like, oh, this person must really believe what it is they're doing. Or assassination. That's, dying publicly, dying a public death. That's another way that you create a martyr, which they were able to later do with the assistance of the government in 1968, physically kill him. But up until that point, he was very much, he was consciously involved in what he was doing. It wasn't as if he had puppeteers behind him and he was just this unknowledgeable pawn in the system. He knew full well what he believed in and what he was doing, what he was up to. And the reason why I brought up the whole pastor thing is because the whole pastor thing for him was a deception. He didn't genuinely believe in the Bible. That's important to note, because if he, later in his messaging and his ministry, I guess you could call it, he's talking about mass redistribution of wealth and universal income and all these socialist communist buzzwords. And it's not that he arrived at these ideas late in his career. He had these ideas since the time he was a teenager.
Well, can I give a little pushback?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. At that time, though, there was deep segregation, and even though blacks was doing well, within their own communities, and it was still an inequality. And that's the main message that he had, was one of equality. So I'm not disputing whether or not he knew consciously or unconsciously what he was doing as far as, a socialist movement that he had, or the redistribution of wealth. But what I'm arguing is that at that time, I feel like that was needed. That was something that was needed, was a redistribution of wealth, because there was a big inequality. There was big flaws within our system when it came to somebody who was dark skinned.
I understand that that's the narrative that is pushed in our public schools, but that's actually not the fact. That's actually not the case. Thomas Sowell demonstrates this wasn't the case. My own research demonstrates that this wasn't the case, that in fact, blacks were doing very well, and they were, to par with the way that whites were trending in this country.
And certain,
of course, you had your one more time.
In certain areas, like
in certain areas, but this is
all. Tulsa, Oklahoma is one of them examples where it was great for you if you was black. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You had businesses, you owned homes. On the West Coast, man, people were living good. They had jobs. People were going to college. There was 2 parents in the home, but in the South, it wasn't the same.
In the South, it was the same. So for me in particular, my maternal side of the family is from Oklahoma, and my paternal side of the family is from Arkansas. For generations, we've done quite well in the South, and this isn't unique to our family. This is actually quite regular for our family. But the point that I was trying to make is you had whites who were doing well in certain areas. You had whites who were not doing so well in certain areas. I have pictures from my great grandfather's generation of him in the field picking cotton, and you see 3 other white kids right alongside him picking cotton as well. And so this notion that only blacks had it bad and whites, no, blacks had it bad in certain areas in the same way that Italians had it bad in certain areas, in the same way that the Irish or the natives or the Mexicans had it bad. And so what we tend to do, and I'm not accusing you of doing this, but what we tend to do in this country is proceed as though blacks have a kind of monopoly on suffering, when the reality is history shows us that everybody has suffered. When you look at the Jim Crow laws, and this is the very last point I'll make before I give it back to you, but when you look at the Jim Crow laws, the laws where states or counties implemented separation, we want the blacks to be separate from the whites. A lot of these laws, and they don't talk about this, were agreed upon from their inception by both black leaders and white leaders.
Oh, no, not disagreeing at all. I agree 100% with that. But here's the thing.
Okay.
When you have separate school systems and you have black kids, not poor whites, only, like, even the poor whites schools, if you go back in history, there's pictures of them, are different than the poor black schools. They were segregated. There's different water fountains. You couldn't go into the same place and get something to eat. You had all these things that were taking effect. Then you have, when you talk about the Jim Crow laws, we could take it back a little and go to the vagrant laws. When people got off of the plantations, laws were agreed upon from people that if somebody didn't have a job, that you can put them right back where? Where was the prisons at that time? The slave plantation. They go to work on the slave plantation. So I understand what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing. All I'm saying, and well, one thing I'm disagreeing upon is that, blacks there was a need for Martin Luther King to give the message that he gave when it came to equality, when you have it to where my kid can't drink with Russo's kid because he's darker skinned.
So this is where I think the biggest kind of clashing of heads come into play between myself and many of the black leftists, and also a lot of your black Republicans. And I find myself kind of as an outsider when it comes to both sides of the so-called political spectrum. The reality is, when it came to separation laws, these were things that were agreed upon, not all of them in every case, but in many instances, they were policies that were implemented at the agreement of both so-called black and so-called white leaders. And a lot of them had sunset or expiration dates on them. The idea being that we need to separate so we can compete in the marketplace within the context of our own cultures. And after such amount of time has expired, we will then break down these rules and we'll come together and this, that, and the third. A lot of these laws were being repealed well before those expiration dates because businessmen, black and white, were finding that they were unfeasible, that it's actually unfeasible to have these laws in place and at the same time make money. And not only that, there was familiarity that was being had between black and white in commerce, in the marketplace. So these rules were being repealed well before Martin Luther King even stepped onto the scene. One thing that I will reject about what you're saying is that Martin Luther King was the only person who had the answer. His message was necessary. Well, you didn't quite put it that way, to be fair to you. Yeah, you didn't put it that way. But the implication I think that a lot of people have is that Martin Luther King's voice was necessary because of the conditions. I reject and push back against that. What I advise those who are listening to do is to look up Joseph H. Jackson. Joseph H. Jackson. He was the most popular Negro pastor from the early to mid and even into the late 20th century. He believed in the gospel, the fundamental Orthodox Christian gospel. He practiced what he preached. And when it comes to civil rights, his approach was that of an economic one. In fact, his approach was in keeping with what Booker T. Washington taught. Booker T. Washington taught, cast down your bucket where you are. Don't wait for the white man or the government. It's on you to be a man, to be a person of integrity, to make your own way. Joseph H. Jackson was a continuation of that. He was a president of the National Baptist Convention, which boasted 7 million Black churchgoers. The South overwhelmingly embraced Joseph H. Jackson. Martin Luther King's church was actually under the umbrella of the NBC, and Martin Luther King wanted to wrestle away leadership from Joseph H. Jackson so that way he can shift the fundamental undergird of the NBC to be more progressive, to be more liberal. But Black churchgoers overwhelmingly rejected Martin Luther King because these were Black Southern Christians who believed in the gospel. They believed in personal salvation. They didn't believe in all the stuff that Martin Luther King was talking about.
So that comes down to a religious aspect.
Well, it's from a religious, but also an economic aspect. I'll give you an example. There were Black sharecroppers who were being cheated by farmers in the South. And there were also white sharecroppers who were being cheated by farmers in the South as well. But what Joseph H. Jackson did as president of the NBC is the NBC bought, I think, 400 acres of land in the South, and they allowed these Black sharecroppers to go and work the land without charging them anything. So all the money that they were able to raise from selling their crops, they were advised to then take that money and buy their own farmland so they can move from being sharecroppers to farmers, because there's power in economics. There's power in being able to have your own, to get your own land. These were things that were actually working in terms of breaking down prejudice, in terms of building up and maintaining some spirit of independence and dignity amongst the Black men. What Martin Luther King was able to do, and I'll give it back to you after this. Yes, what Martin Luther King was able to do was systematically and rhetorically deconstruct what Booker T. Washington was doing. While Booker T. Washington said it's on you to be a man, to take responsibility and to not allow yourself or your life to be dictated by someone else, Martin Luther King comes along and says, well, we're living in two worlds and Black man can't find a job. In fact, most Black men had jobs. So what are we even talking about? When it comes to Black buses, which Claude Anderson talks about, when it comes to a lot of these businesses that Black folks had, a lot of that was disrupted by the civil rights movement. And not only that, soon thereafter, a lot of your young Blacks, your Black youngsters took the way of the Black Power movement. So we let our hand off the proverbial plow. We picked up picket signs, and we saw it fit to win some kind of political capital, some kind of economic capital through politics, as opposed to doing it the way that our grandfathers and great grandfathers did, which was to do it by way of the plow and do it by way of square business. And you can see as a result of the way that some of the Chinese did it, some of the Mexicans did it, who weren't getting as much attention as Black folks did with the civil rights movement, even though they were treated the same as we were. They were able to make economic and social strides by keeping their hand on the plow instead of doing this little detour type thing that Blacks did with the civil rights movement.
So, all right, my dear brother, I'll say this: the issues that you brought up thus far that stand out to me, that the problem that I feel, I guess, that you have with Martin Luther King, God bless him, is economic, it is religious, and his political stance of who was aligned with him. Again, I will say that his thing was equality. There was men that were Black, even though I know everybody was treated bad at some point. Not disputing that at all. I'm Irish as well as a Moor. You know what I'm saying? But the thing that Martin Luther King was fighting for was equality, where people shouldn't be lynched from trees just because they're driving down the wrong road, just because they looked at a woman the wrong way that was white, or just because they were somewhere that they weren't supposed to be, or were incarcerated wrongly and beat down to the point where no medics could even come into the building. It was equality that he was pushing for. It wasn't a political agenda. I believe that the political agenda that you're speaking of maybe was in the background. Maybe it was. Maybe he did know about it. But I know that his life and everything that was pertaining to his life, he practiced what he preached. That man he stood nonviolent for equality. It had nothing to do with pushing, I want you to vote Democrat, or I want you to vote Republican, or I want you to have your own businesses. No, it was just to be treated equal. That was his message. So I felt what's confusing me. I don't understand why down somebody who's passed away, who did die, who was martyred, and try to oust them or put out business about them that it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, it does matter though. He pushed for equality, and we wouldn't have the advancements that we have right now in our society had it not been for him. Not true. As I demonstrated earlier, and with all due respect, I'm not trying to be antagonistic or anything like that. No, it's fine. But go ahead. But with all due respect, again, as I said earlier, these laws were already being repealed and falling off the books before Martin Luther King. Race relations were already healing and on an upward trajectory for Martin King with the civil rights movement. Agitation and propaganda is important to point out, because friction is what reopens those wounds that have healed. As Julia Brown, who was a part of the Communist Party for 9 years, she and I can share the video with Anthony. She gives a live testimony. Time out, my brother, not to cut you off, but again, there was people being lynched, brother, chased out of towns, murdered. There was people being beaten for trying to apply for jobs. There's kids being killed for drinking at the wrong water fountains. This is my whole point. I understand what you're saying.
Let me try to figure out, because I think there's just a little gap in the conversation. I don't think Chad's saying that wasn't happening, but he's saying that it was on the decline naturally, just like laws being repealed. All of it was on the decline, and all this did was send it just the same way we're seeing now in the inner cities.
I get it, but what I'm trying to say is, even though it was on the decline, somebody was still willing to speak out for it because it was still happening.
Yeah, but it didn't have a positive effect, because things were on the decline, and all it did was send things back the opposite direction, which ushered in the 1980s.
Because they wanted it to stop. They didn't want it to just be on a decline. Well, we only killed 10 this year. Oh, we only killed 9 the following year. No, they wanted it to stop. Period.
Who wanted it to stop?
Dr. Martin Luther King and the people that was with him in that movement.
That's not true.
Maybe I'm wrong.
They didn't. Yeah.
But that's how
it's not true that they wanted it to stop. In fact, they look forward to things like that happening, because what it did was it reinfused support for their movement. They wanted their movement. And the thing is, as far as what we got as a result of the civil rights movement was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is a non-constitutional or unconstitutional piece of legislation, because it expanded the role of the federal government at the expense of the rights of the American people. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, which Martin Luther King fought so hard for, did not bring about equality. In fact, it laid the groundwork for all the turmoil that we're seeing today in the way of affirmative action, in the way of DEI, in the way of critical race theory. All this stuff stands on the shoulders of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
But and it gave... That wasn't his intent.
That was very much his intent.
I hear you. I just don't see it, because the way that the man lived his life. That's
how did he see? I think there's misconceptions on how he lived his life. The guy was to use the parlance of our times, he was a man whore. He was not a good, I
was a man whore, but I still got a message of unity.
But the bigger,
you're not telling people you're a pastor. You're not going around telling people that you're a pastor.
This is true.
You get what I'm saying? The thing is, Martin Luther King was wild. He was a wild dude. And I'm saying this not to besmirch him. I'm saying it because it's a fact. The dude would go and give a speech in front of a church, and then go into a hotel with the money that he earned from speaking and buy prostitutes and cocaine. This is who he was. But I don't talk about stuff like that, even though that's factual. I don't talk about stuff like that because that's not my point. If I were to make that argument, even though it's true, the pushback that I will get is, well, none of us are perfect. We all do imperfect things, and that
sounds like Fannie Willis,
right? And that's
my man's a cokehead.
He was. This is factually true.
Well, you're on it, Chad. Go ahead and bring like what's the research that shows that.
Well, a lot of this, and here's the thing about that. So a lot of this evidence was revealed from insiders who were basically reporting on things that Martin Luther King was doing on the one hand, and the other part of it is that he was being investigated by the FBI. But a lot of people reject the FBI information because
they were racist and hated him.
No, it had nothing to do with racism. It had everything to do with anti-communism. This is the disconnect. It had everything to do with anti-communism. The fact is, there were black folks who worked for the FBI, and so if they're genuinely racist and they hate Negroes and this, that, and the third, why would they hire or employ black folks? Not to sweep the floors, but to be actual FBI agents.
Whip to beat black men on the plantation. The same exact reason, brother.
Yeah. So that's here's the thing. When it comes to black culture, and I'm not accusing you of this, Kash, but when it comes to black, sorry.
I said, no, I understand. I don't take no offense, my brother. You can speak freely. We brothers.
Right.
I don't have nothing against you. You're my brother.
Well, I just want, I know you know that, but I just want the audience to know this. When it comes to black culture is so ready to believe conspiracies that kind of validate this notion that America is systemically racist and they're always going to try to kill our leaders. They're more ready to believe that than to question people like Martin Luther King and say, what was his true agenda other than what we have been all taught? Like, we all went to the same public schools. We all got the same lessons. We all got the same kind of propaganda and indoctrination, if you will. But we never stop. If the government is willing to lie to us about an insurrection, they call it an insurrection. If they're willing to lie to us about that, what else are they willing to lie to us about? All of these social justice movements had government backing. The civil rights movement had government backing. Feminism had government backing. LGBT right now, as we speak, have government backing. And so if the government is willing to make Martin Luther King a national holiday, again, which
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Like, which conspiracy will we believe? Oh, the government killed him, but they tried to cover it up by making it a national holiday. Like, that's a very easy conspiracy to believe and get behind. But the fact of the matter is, you had people working inside the government who were also supporting the civil rights movement. For example, whenever Martin Luther King, whenever people began to pick up on the fact that that his closest advisor, Stanley Levison, was a communist, John F. Kennedy himself brought Martin Luther King to the Rose Garden and told him, hey, people are aware that your number one guy is a communist. You might want to try to distance yourself from him because the optics look bad. And of course, I'm paraphrasing the conversation, but this is a conversation that the president of the United States is having with Martin Luther King. And so again, I'm not saying that John F. Kennedy was a communist, but I'm saying that there's intelligence that understood full well what the civil rights movement were doing. They were trying to assist with it in a detached way so as to get it to pass, because their interest in passing it wasn't equality for black folks. You must understand. Their interest in passing it was to expand their own power. Here's the thing about communism, and I'll give it back to you.
Lyndon B. Johnson's quote?
Here's the thing. Here's the thing about communism. And then I'll give it right back to you. I'll give it right back to you after I make this point. When it comes to communism, part of one of its goals is that the government will own the means of production. Goods, services, like government basically controls how companies are run. We see this happening with the WEF. You know what I mean? We see things that are going on right now where the government is getting its hooks into commerce and the way that production is carried out in not only America, but in the world. They're trying to create a global economy. And so when you look at the Civil Rights Act of 1964, this was an incremental step of doing just that, of giving the government the means of production. because up until that point, the government didn't have much say in how small companies are ran. But the Civil Rights Act of 1964 gave the government more power as far as the free market is concerned, because now it's telling small companies who they can and can't hire, who they can and can't serve. That's Titles 2 and Title 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It had nothing to do with equality. It had everything to do with expanding the role of the government. I'm against anything that expands the role of the government. If a white company today told me, Chad, because you're black, I'm not going to serve you, I'm going to take my happy ass to the company down the street that's their competitor and run them out of business in the free market. I'm not going to run to Big Daddy government and say, hey, do something about the fact that they're not serving me, because that's weak. That's absolutely weak.
I totally agree, brother. I don't disagree with you at all. I don't. All I'm saying is, again, I don't think when they drafted this up, in my heart of hearts, I don't believe that Dr. King thought that in the years after his death that it was going to be used for nefarious purposes as it is today. Because I don't disagree with you on that. They definitely are using it to do some shady shit. I don't disagree. You know,
so his connection with the Rothchilds and so what about his connection with the Rothchilds and Bayard Rustin and Stanley Levison, all of whom are avowed communists who, like, it's not like they all got together and they kept Martin Luther King out and they huddled together. Hey, how can we pull a string to do this? How can we pull a string to do that? No, he was in on exactly what.
Well, here, I'll say this. He's a human. Martin Luther King was a human being. He's not exempt from flaws. I'm not saying he wasn't flawed. All I'm saying is that he took a stance and he lived and died believing that stance and standing for that. Now, did he need money and funding? Yeah. And at that time, you had to go through these people. And at that time, we didn't know the things back then that we know today about the people that you just mentioned. And I'm sure that Dr. King was ignorant.
We did know, though. We did know.
No, we didn't. We weren't alive. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he was ignorant to it.
Well, let me really quick say something, because Kash, you and I had this conversation when I met Chad like a year and a half ago. We started talking, and maybe it was probably on Martin Luther King Day. We kind of had this discussion about it in the slight debate. The problem is we only had 10 minutes to talk at a time. We were going back and forth. And I'm somewhere in the middle of both of you guys, whether or not Martin Luther King knew who these people were. I think the big issue was Martin Luther King was driven, based on everything that I've learned from Chad, the conversation that I've had since then, even the start of the conversation I had with you, Kash. Martin Luther King, we don't know his motive. We can't. There's no way to fully know his motives. But based on everything in his world, including the stuff we can 100% prove, which is the mistresses, his kind of guiding force was power. And I think power is always a nefarious tool when not used correctly. And that ego is an issue. So even if he didn't know that, you know, the stuff that we know about the Rothschilds and all the different stuff with the global elite and where he fit into that role, it's the big issue for me is I don't think he cared. I think his issue was he enjoyed the power. He thought that maybe there was some good positive change in it, but there's somewhere in the story between you, Kash, and Chad of where Martin Luther King's mental state probably was.
I'll tell you this. 2024 has been crazy thus far. And y'all are bringing some things to me that sound alien. And I respect it. You know, I respect everybody's opinions. And I would like to talk with you more one-on-one, Chad. Maybe you can show me some of the stuff that you're reading that's telling you these things.
Anthony, give him my number.
I will.
Yeah, because I would like to, you know, speak with you more and learn about it. But as I said, man, to say that, I'll put it like this. Growing up, I learned a lot about Martin Luther King. I did my Black History Month on Martin Luther King. I
did too in third grade.
I was all on Martin Luther King and all on Malcolm X. I love those two brothers. And whether or not he had nefarious purposes, he impacted my life and he impacted the world that we live in today in a great way.
Negatively.
Well, maybe today because of what they used his message for. But when he was alive, his message was used in a positive manner. He didn't hurt anybody except for the establishment that set the rules that said, look, black guy, you ain't finna drink over here at this water fountain, and we're gonna hang your black ass if you do. You know what I'm saying? He changed that.
Think about how powerful it is, though, Kash, to be able to have that narrative come out of your mouth and end up creating policy that actually does the opposite long term. And that's where I think it's a semantic issue of whether or not he did that on purpose.
Knowingly, exactly, because we can't say that. We know that at the time that legislation was needed. At that time, if you're a researcher, It was needed.
It wasn't needed.
horrible.
But his belief is that it was not needed, is what he's saying.
And I understand that. I can't switch to what someone believes because we all study different things. You know, and that's the great thing about America. We're all allowed to have our opinions and read the books that we want to read to form our narratives. And that's okay. But for me, looking back at history and all the history that I study, because I study some out there history, bro. And in prison, you got nothing but time to read.
Can I ask you a question, Kash?
Yes, sir.
Are you willing to consider the fact that it is at least conceivable or fathomable that Martin Luther King is a sacred cow for you, that you don't want to know if these things are true? Because
if you knew me,
so that's not conceivable.
No. If you knew
because
me
there's people. I would say.
Hold on.
Go ahead.
If you knew me at all, if you watched anything about me, I'm all about evolution. I'm all about evolving and changing my thinking, especially to fit the facts.
Well, that's good to hear then. That's good to hear, because for me, this isn't even a debate. This is a conversation.
No, not at all. It's just a discussion.
Right. It's a discussion, because the thing is like, to me, it's really telling when a man is willing to evolve and acclimate himself to the truth.
You want to know something? There's a wise saying that I live by. It says, a wise man, how's it go? It says, a wise man changes his mind often, but a fool is obstinate and knows all things. A wise man will change his mind often, and I like to consider myself to be a wise man. So you could change my mind tomorrow if you present me something that would show me different than what I've studied and learned. I'm open to that.
Okay, I got my work cut out for me then.
And I would love for you to watch. If you watch Uncle Tom, this will start specifically the second one. It'll start to get the motor running. And we only got about 5 minutes left. I want to say one last thing, then I'll let you guys kind of conclude.
Okay.
Just put it this. I'm going to put this in perspective of January 6th, because obviously that matters directly right now to you, Kash, to all of us. When we talked about governmental programs and governmental overreach and narratives presented and how the government essentially owns all of these different groups, the thing that it owns the most is the narrative, because they run the education system. And this is where I start to back off. So right now, that's how I started to back off when I disagreed with Chad in a lot of ways, is think about how, based on who is in control right now, the media, the government, 50 years from now, what are they going to say about January 6th? They're going to say, depending on where we are, it could be deemed the darkest day in American history. And it's going to be, and that is how we are literally looking through the lens of Martin Luther King. Chad is talking about the fact that this was something that allowed Lyndon B. Johnson, the civil rights movement, to essentially put Black people in chains for forever. They're going to be voting for us forever. So it's a thought process of who is in charge at the time. And yes, Martin Luther King has always been an inspiration to me. I was like, equality, and that narrative is great. But on the backside of it, the negatives of what he did that brought into all of this negative DEI stuff, that it continues to divide our country, when really racism was all but gone 15, 20 years ago. Not perfect, but all but gone 15, 20 years ago. It's allowed us to claw our way kind of back in to this negative polarization between all of the groups. And that's the last thing I'll say is, remember, history is based off of, well, you always used to say this, his story, and also mostly who is in charge of that story. Exactly. Chad, I'm going to let you go last. And then if you got to go, I'll have Kash make his fight. Well, I'll do something real quick so you guys can both say something before you get off.
Thing, my brother.
So the reason why I asked Kash whether it's possible that he construes Martin Luther King as a sacred cow, and whether he is able to again acclimate himself to the facts. The reason I asked the question in that way is because for many of us, we do hold our favorite history, folks in history, in such high esteem that you can't say anything that reveals who they truly are. And that's I think a problem. For me, I look to people like Thomas Jefferson and others for a very long time in such high regard. And I'm still learning things about Thomas Jefferson on a philosophical from a philosophical perspective that I completely disagree with, and how he was in alignment with some of your Enlightenment thinkers who were just completely like bonkers crazy. And so that's another story for another day. But my point is like, because I'm learning these things, I'm beginning to understand like, oh, this is just another man. They're no smarter than me. They're no more brilliant than me. They're no this, they're no that. This is why I believe in the whole mantra of worship God, not man. I'm not going to put any man on a pedestal. Now, why is it important to talk about Martin Luther King? That's a question that Kash put to me earlier that I don't think I had the opportunity to answer. The reason it's important is because social justice movements will always be a part of Western society and Western culture. And my concern is that we don't know as a people how to deal with social justice movements. Oftentimes, when you look at social justice movements, you'll find, if you follow the money, if you look at who's really behind them, that the whole thing is a ploy to expand the role of government, to expand the role of the federal government, and to usurp your power and your control and your freedom in the process. We used to live in days where everything was controlled by your monarchy, your nobles and the people who were at the top. You had no middle class. It was just those at the top and the peasants at the bottom. We don't live in such times anymore. We're much more, it's much more difficult to get us to do whatever it is you want us to do. And so the way that you get us to do what you want us to do is through social justice movements, through marketing, through making us feel like we're being part of something that's going to be better for the future, only to find out that at the back end of it, the government ends up with more power. We end up more sick as a country and as a culture, and it continues to fall from there. And so what I ask the audience to do, don't take my word for it. Go and do your own research. I can point you to some resources, but go and do your own research and see if what I'm saying is true or false. And once you find out or determine that what I'm saying is actually true, make a decision from this day forward to not take these social justice movements at face value, because there are more to come, and they work because they pull on our heartstrings. They make us think that these martyrs are doing this for a good cause. Greta Thunberg is the one that they're currently trying to build up into this hero. What are they going to teach our grandchildren 75, 80 years from now about who Greta Thunberg was? She was a woman who fought the odds, who told the elites about themselves, and she's leading us down this path.
She was Helen Keller.
Right. And so again, it's like, it's not so much that we need to look back and hate Martin Luther King. That's not my crusade at all.
Okay.
That's not Martin Luther King is just like any other man, only he did a little bit more deceptively. But my point is, be cautious of these social justice movements, because they're not always what they seem. Hell, they're never what they seem.
That, brother, you got my vote on that one. That's the facts right there.
All right, Chad's got to go into like 2 or 3 minutes. So Kash, wrap it up right here for us, and then you stay on with me, and we'll talk about what's coming up.
Okay. No, man, I just want to say, Chad, it's a pleasure to meet you, my brother. It was a great discussion. I appreciate your insight. I'm looking forward to talking with you more, you know what I'm saying, later on. Happy Martin Luther King Day to everybody. not for the things that Chad said that the research that he did pointing him to the direction of what King's nefarious things was. I'm only talking about the positivity, because you guys know that's what I like to focus on, is the positivity. So the positivity that he brought to the table, I appreciate that. Russo, I appreciate you for accommodating this, man, and making this happen. Chad, brother, it's a pleasure, man. I'm looking forward to talking with you more.
Yes, sir. Looking forward to it.
Chad, go ahead and do what you got to do. Kash and I are going to wrap up, because we're going to talk about what we got coming up with shows later this week. Chad, we'll reconnect. I'll send you guys a group message. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Chad. All right, Kash. There's a couple things at the end. I saw like some people's comments. I think there's more to this conversation. I told you he's fun to talk to.
I like him. He's not.
He's good.
I disagree with a lot of his stances, but that's only because I haven't studied what he studied. So I'm going to go and read that and then look into it and see what he's talking about. But
and it's hard to find. The thing is, it's hard to find, just the same way as 90% of media is all on the conservative, or is all on the liberal side.
Well, here's my thing, right? They killed Dr. King. Okay? They killed him. If he was on their side, wouldn't he be allowed to keep going and furthering this message until death? Because he died. No, what happened after he passed? It wasn't.
That was this comment. This is what I was going to bring up, but I knew we were running out of time. This is another for another day. If the government funded him, then why would they take him out if he wasn't on the right side and the right track? But we were talking about this before the show. It's because the whole thing leading up to that moment where he started to shift.
He was about to oust the FBI.
Right. So he was starting to shift, but that means the body of his work
was going to change.
Right. And the body of his work that we see is actually not as good as we may think. And again, how much I know about
Chad
Chad and
and
how
getting busted upside the head with bricks. He was probably getting sick of the shit and was going to be like, you know what? Fuck this. Time to fight. Rest in peace, Martin Luther King, man. I love you, brother, and you impacted my life, and I appreciate you for it.
No, you guys, I foresee more conversations with you guys, and the fact that they haven't fully shot Uncle Tom 3 yet, I think that there might be maybe a spot for you in there. I don't know. That'd be pretty.
I don't like the title.
You don't like what?
I don't like the title.
That's the whole point of it, though.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Uncle Tom's been a bogarted term because that was
Uncle Tom was the one that actually helped the people get off the plantation, and even though Master liked him, he was helping the slaves. Sambo was the nigga that was cracking the whip.
Right. We talked about this before you went in. All right. So this is what we got. We've got a Truth Will Set You Free tomorrow. That'll be with Kash, Casey, and I, 6 o'clock. Go ahead and look for that. We'll double check on time. That's when we usually do it. But I know Chad's got a show at that time. Not Chad O. Jackson, but Chad. We'll see. Well, as of right now, it'll be 6 o'clock. You'll see that posted later today. So Kash is going to get back to current events. Current events with Kash. Casey will be with us tomorrow. And then we will figure out when we will be doing our next Where the Heck Did Kash Go? Part 2, and that'll be with all 3 of us. So, and for Casey watching, I thought of the reason why I wanted yesterday's to be with just us, which is it was leading
don't
up.
Like Casey. Just tell everybody what it is.
Because Casey,
you don't like Casey. I love Casey.
Well, I was thinking about it like we were there on January 6th. So it fits to just talk January 6th because we were the ones that were there. Now we can start talking about the aftermath and everything. And that's really the best place for Casey to get involved. So we'll be doing that probably Wednesday or Thursday. We'll do the next part. We'll keep chopping this up into different areas. I noticed we had about 200 people watching throughout the day, but I did not see enough thumbs ups and likes. So before you guys get off, please do that. Hit that button.
Ring that bell. Ring that bell on YouTube, on my page and Russo's page. Ring the bell so you guys get notified every time we do a live. I'd appreciate that, and I love you guys.
Perfect. And then Casey, go ahead. What a dick. Do you see what he said? Russo hates whites.
He's a racist.
Go ahead and
take us out.
Go ahead. What did you say?
Take us out?
No, not yet. I'm going to tell people if you guys want to help Kash and find out all the links, I have the Give, Send, Go. Casey, if you want to put the bit.ly, I'll go ahead and show that as well. So apparently when you just do helpkash.com off of Facebook, they block that because they don't like Give, Send, Goes. But if you just type it in, helpkash.com, I think after last night's show, we raised another $400 or $500 to get him back to work. That's what that's for.
Thank you, guys.
Again, we're not asking for money, but if you want to donate and give so that he's got something set up so that we can, he can look official like Chad and I and have good stuff, that's how we're going to do that.
You guys got all that equipment. I am envious. I know that's not a good thing to be, but I am. I'm jealous. I'm very jealous that you guys got this cool equipment and you can do all the stuff that I like to do, but better.
See, you're starting to sound like Martin Luther King. You're envious and you're trying to be holy.
I sound like Martin Luther King, then it's a good day. How about that?
I always called you KLK. That's what I like to call you. And then I was like, man, Chad kind of ruined it for me.
Martin Luther King, Kash Lee Kelly, MLK, KLK. That's interesting.
I know. And this guy is just the whole time I haven't given him any attention, but he's been in the comments just talking shit. Fleo, Kash will tell you, I love you. We love you. It's all good. God bless you, brother.
We love you, bro. Nothing but the best for you.
All right, take us out.
Unite. Don't fight. Be a street light, because only you could be the change that you wish to see in the world. And when you get too stressed out, you got to remember to pray, America, because without God, everything falls apart.
Woo!
Yeah, brother!